Okay, just wait for Jim to shut the door and we'll get started. So, Rick, thank you very much again for agreeing to redo this. And hopefully it'll all work fine. The recording will work fine. So for the record, today is July 16, 2024. And I'm here with Charles Rick Harrienger, a Vietnam vet. And we're going to talk about his experience first, just basically leading up to when you joined the service, your experience in the service, your experience after the service, and we'll talk a little bit at the end about the book of poetry that you wrote several years ago concerning your experience in the war. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay, just for the record, if you want to state your address.
Okay, I'll start with my full name is Charles Frederick Harringer Jr. And my address is 444 Mango Circle, St. Augustine, Florida, 32905.
Good, excellent. Okay, so why don't you start off by talking about just very briefly the years leading up to when you joined the service, where you grew up, and then how you came to be in the Army.
Okay, am I on? Is the camera all right now?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay. I'm a New York State resident of 69 years, or I was a New York State resident of 69 years. I was born in Syracuse, New York. I grew up in Auburn, and I began my military career, as it were, somewhere around April of 1967.
Okay. Were you drafted?
No, I
enlisted.
I enlisted.
Okay.
That was my way of avoiding the draft.
Okay. So that was the reason that you chose to enlist?
Well, it was. I'd been kicked out of high school, or I'd been kicked out of the music curriculum that was an important part of my justification for completing high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry, I'm a little slow this morning. It's
not a problem.
I know you can edit stuff out. My I quit the Army, or I quit school and joined the Army. I enlisted into the U.S. Army Band at West Point.
Okay.
And unfortunately, they didn't need tuba players that year.
You always need a tuba player, but no.
But yeah, that was a very complicated interview. A little Arthur Fiedler conductor conducted the interview, and he said it was obvious that I could play, but my theory needed to be upgraded in order to pass the U.S. Naval School of Music, where you went for 2 years, then you went to Juilliard for 4 years, then you come back a commissioned officer in the U.S. Army Band at West Point. So basically, it was just an enlistment ploy. You know, the enlistment officer set up the interview, you know, knowing full well that it wasn't tuba players they needed, it was soldiers.
Okay. Yeah. Had you mentioned Arthur Fiedler, or did you say someone similar to Arthur Fiedler?
He was similar to Arthur Fiedler. He was a little old man with white beard and white hair. You know, he kind of looked like Albert Einstein.
Right.
You know? Yeah, but yeah, in 2 weeks, whether or not I passed the audition, I was scheduled to go to basic training. So yeah, I completed basic training in Fort Gordon, Georgia.
Okay.
and AIT.
How long was that?
That's 8 weeks.
Okay.
And AIT and jump school. And I'm a second generation paratrooper. My father was also in the airborne. He was in the 11th Airborne.
Was that in the Second World War?
Yes,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, he was in the Pacific Theater. You interviewed him, but it that wasn't an audio. It was just video. No, it wasn't a video. It was just an audio. Excuse me, I had it backwards.
Right. Okay.
And but anyway, yeah, I ruptured an eardrum my qualifying jump and ended up in the hospital where I contracted pneumonia.
Hmm.
And it was a very infectious type of pneumonia. They had us all quarantined for months, and the class that I had graduated jump school and everything with went on to Vietnam, and the majority of them, with the exception of the company commander, was killed on 875. And
If I can just ask you just to try to look up a little more.
okay.
Okay, just look right into the camera. That's perfect. Good. Okay.
So yeah,
And maybe if you back up again where you were, we can see your full face. That's perfect.
okay.
Yeah, just make yourself entirely comfortable, but we want to see your full face.
Okay.
Is that good?
Is it good for you?
That's perfect. Yes.
All right.
Great.
I'm never sure with visuals.
That makes two of
see the
us.
same thing. I can't see the same thing you can.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I ended up a replacement to all of the troops that I had trained with in the 173rd Airborne in Long Binh, Vietnam.
Okay.
Central Highlands.
When was this that you first arrived?
Probably somewhere around July or October. No, actually, it was closer to Christmas time. It was November or December, because my first tour ended at Christmas time again. So yeah,
So you arrived around Christmas 1967.
yeah.
Okay.
And as a
So-
matter of fact,
Yeah.
it was also Tet. You know
Okay.
what Tet is, and the enemy hit an ammo bunker that was one click away from where we were housed. And to show you how green we were, we still had our civilian underwear on, so that when the flashes from the explosion of the ammo dump went off, it turned our underwear like a fluorescent, like under a black light.
Wow.
It was really strange.
Okay. So what was your feeling, your experience when you first arrived in Vietnam?
Well, other than the fear, I suppose I felt I was finally on a journey to raise myself in my father's esteem.
Okay.
He never approved of my choice of music as a career choice, and So I think I hoped that you know, by serving in the same capacity that he did, that he'd think better of me.
So had you mentioned that you went into combat pretty much as soon as you first arrived?
Well, pretty much it, you know, it was there was in-country processing, which meant changing underwear and, you know, getting battle fatigues and getting a weapon issued to you and assigned to a company. I don't really remember how long all of that took, you know, but it wasn't long before we were on a chopper pad and headed up to on K, which is where the 173rd was base camped.
Okay, so what was it like when you got there?
Well, the military made war as much as working like a job as they possibly could. You know, you went out into the field from Monday to Friday, and then on Saturday and Sunday you were brought back to this rear area, which was a well-defended position, you know, with 155s and you know, it was a base camp.
Okay.
And the weekend was, you know, we all had either guard duty or KP or there was some other capacity that you were assigned for the weekend, but it was mostly just 3 hots and a cot. You know, it was kind of regrouped from the week before.
So were you out on patrols then all week usually, or what was-
Yeah, yeah. They would drop us off at the bottom of one hill and pick us up on top. You know, and uh, yeah, it was the biggest emotion that I remember experiencing was just surviving the jungle. You know, the firefights were far and few between. You know, usually we ended up, you know, climbing a mountain and there was nothing there or nobody there. You know, once in a while it would be occupied and there'd be small skirmishes, but F-111s have a way of moving Charlie off of any real estate.
Well, now you said that you arrived around the time of Tet, and of course that would have been when the major Tet offensive occurred in early 1968. Were you involved in that much?
Well, only in that, only in that, in Long Binh, where we initially entered the country. That was uh, the biggest incursion into the U.S. presence that I experienced during Tet of that year.
Okay. So now, how long were you on in the base camp that you had first been sent to? How long did that last?
Well, about, I'm going to say 8 months.
Okay.
I was still on patrol for my 19th birthday, which was July 30th. So yeah, I was out there at least that long.
And you said you didn't get involved in a lot of firefights?
No, no, it was there were 2 or 3, but it was mostly sniper fire or, you know, one there were no major engagements or anything like that. You know, it was we were sent up the hill expecting, you know, it to be occupied, but when we got there, there was nobody there.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. So at the end of the 8 months, what happened next?
Well, I decided I had had enough of war, and risking malaria was a safer option than a bullet. So I just simply stopped taking my dapsone tablets, and I contracted malaria, and uh, I spent 3 months in the hospital and in Cameron Bay
Okay.
recovering from malaria, and finally one day it was kind of really a ghost story. You know, I Cameron Bay is like Miami was probably in the 1600s. I mean, it was a pristine beach that where I learned to surf
Wow.
while I was in the military. Yeah, it and um, because I had a life-saving badge and a senior water safety instructor, I was in the chair, you know, as a lifeguard whenever we weren't uh, surfing, and was very close to getting transferred, but before that could happen, my company commander called up and what happened to this guy? Did he die or what? And yeah, I had you had to go on sick call every day, and on the way into sick call, you picked up your medical records from the medical clerk, and then on the way out, you know, after the doctor made his notations or whatever, you were supposed to turn it back in.
Mhm.
And I had tucked it underneath my arm and didn't realize it till I got back to my barracks, and I just threw it in the bottom of my footlocker. Um, Serendipity would produce that was the only way that they knew that I was a patient in the hospital was the medical records.
Hmm.
And so I was there for 10 weeks. And you know, once the old man called, I was on a chopper pad in probably 20 minutes. I've forgotten how fast, but I was back in the bush. You know, the fellas, you know, they didn't really hold it against me. You know, I got some ghost time was all, you know, and that they were envious of more than anything else. Um,
Did you say you got some ghost time?
yeah. And
Which means what?
in other words, I spent 10 weeks out of the field
Oh, okay.
in the hospital when it should have only been like 30 days or 60 days or something like that.
Okay. So then you were returned, as you say, to the jungle. And
Yeah.
how long was it from that point until the end of your tour, your first tour?
Yeah. It was probably another 3 or 4 months. My first tour would have been up around Christmas time again in '69, I guess, or '68.
Oh, 68.
Yeah, I've
Right, yeah, because
lost
I have your
track.
sheets here in front of me. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I didn't take an in-country R&R. I just uh took a leave to go home at the end of the year. And so I had a 30-day leave. I was home for Christmas. I didn't realize one of the things that was going on here in the United States were the the big war protests of October and November of 1969. And
Okay, well, we're still in the end of 68.
oh, okay.
Okay. When you say that you went home for a leave, then you had signed on for a second tour at that point?
Well, what happened was after I had finished my first tour, I still had a year left to do in the service.
Right.
And I had gotten orders cut for winter maneuvers in Boulder, Colorado.
Okay.
And after Vietnam, going and playing soldier in the woods was totally unattractive to me. And so I extended for an additional 6 months, which guaranteed that I got out of the Army 6 months early, as well as providing another body for a 6 month enlistment.
Because I think I remember when we tried to do the interview earlier, you said that the deal was that if you signed up for another 6 months, then you got to leave the service 6 months early.
Right. And I didn't have to go back into the field. I went into my secondary MOS, which was medical records specialist.
Okay, and I recall, and also I read in your sheets here that on your second tour, you were working as basically a clerk at a POW camp?
Yes, POW hospital.
Okay.
It was in Long Binh. It was a compound of 3 facilities: LBJ, the 74th Field Hospital, and the 24th Back Hospital were all in the same. We backed up against each other.
Okay.
And
Now, what did you
yeah,
think of the prisoners who were there?
I beg your pardon?
What did you think of the prisoners who were there?
Well, I didn't have any interaction with the prisoners other than I had to set up the medical files and alert CID that an enemy was coming in, you know, so they could interrogate them. But yeah, the long and short of it was the I'm losing my train of thought.
Okay.
It was you know, my office was, I shared it with a radio operator and with a civilian interpreter from the Geneva Convention. You know, she was responsible for that side of the operation.
Okay. I seem to
We,
recall.
huh?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was my records consisted of starting a file for each patient and a 3x5 cross-reference of who was in the hospital and who wasn't. They call it the A&D sheet, the admissions and disposition sheet. And it was a daily report that I was responsible for. And after working in the hospital for a couple of months, I realized that all my records were being changed and being altered.
Okay, yes, I remember that from the earlier interview.
Yeah.
I asked you about that. Okay, so what was all that about?
Well, what it turned out to be was nothing other than the statistical de-escalation of the war. But at the time, it was records that I was responsible for. You know, it was information that I was responsible for.
So this would have been in about the first half of 1969.
Yep.
Okay. And I think you had mentioned in the earlier interview that you were concerned about your records being changed.
Yep.
Okay, what was
Which
that about?
what happened was is that there were erasures and whiteouts on things that I had typed that I knew had been altered, and I became very concerned. I watched very closely, and I caught the civilian secretary leaving the office at lunchtime with the admissions and disposition sheet. And I dragged her right by the hair into the old man's office, you know, the hospital administrator, and he apologized for me in Vietnamese. You know, he didn't know that I could speak Vietnamese. Dismissed her from the office and took me out back to the stairs, and then walked down one stair and
I'm sorry, if you could just try to sit a little bit farther back again.
okay,
Okay, great.
okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, the company commander told me that they knew what was going on and just to keep my mouth shut and do my job. Was that clear?
Now, why were they changing the records?
Well, it was what we know now as the statistical de-escalation of the war. It was to either bump up a troop request or to show that they were I don't know, it was all of that nonsense that MacArthur and Westmoreland, I mean, and Nixon went through. You know, whether he needed more troops. Did you happen to watch that video? McNamara's 100,000.
I've seen a little part of it, yes.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's the key to that whole story was, you know, there were, you know, Westmoreland needed more troops and McNamara didn't have any, and so he reclassified all of the guys that had were 4F and, you know, unfit for military duty.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I forgot where I was going with that.
Okay, well, we were just speaking about your work as a medical records clerk at the POW hospital, and you know, about how you were concerned that some things were being changed on some of the records.
Right, and records that I was responsible for.
Okay.
And so I mulled this over during lunch, and when I came back from lunch, I took a sip from my water bottle that everybody had on their desk, and I pulled a piece of powdered glass off my tongue, and it cut my fingers and it cut my tongue, and I began to seriously because the realization that I might have told the wrong person about this difficulty, and
yeah,
I wrote a hasty will and inserted it in my own medical records and walked around the corner to the 24th of Vac Hospital and asked them if there was anything that they could do for internal hemorrhaging that I suspected I had been ingested powdered glass. So the first thing that the doctor did was send a runner back to for my water pitcher, and under closer observation, it wasn't powdered glass, it was just sand that was trapped in the ice. But the tension at that point, I was laughing and crying hysterically, you know, and he determined that I'd had enough war, you know, and next thing I knew, I was in a psychiatric hospital in Yokota, Japan.
Oh, okay. So
And
when in 1969 was that?
I'm not sure. It was probably, I was on a lot of drugs, right? They had me on 1,500 milligrams of Thorazine twice a day,
Hmm.
which was enough to, you know, convince me that that it was all a figment of my imagination, and that, you know, I was being sent to Valley Forge Army Hospital in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania.
Okay, so you were supposed to have a second tour, which was going to be 6 months working
Right.
at the POW hospital. How long did you actually work there?
Maybe 3.
Okay.
I don't really remember. There were a couple of weeks when I first got there where they tried very hard not to put me in my MOS. They gave me the laundry truck to drive the hospital laundry into Saigon, which was only 20 minutes away. And I had an accident my first day on the job. An Arvin laundry truck was going by on this very narrow road where if we both put 2 wheels in the ditch on either side, the
Mhm.
2 trucks could pass each other. But at 40 miles an hour, our rearview mirrors clacked together, and it sounded like a rifle shot, you know. But yeah, the motor pool sergeant chewed me out for you know, damaging one of his vehicles and all of that, and I ripped up my military driver's license and threw it at his feet, and I said I demand to be put in my MOS.
Hmm.
Well, that didn't work. They next gave me an assignment uh watching the mama sons fill sandbags in a little oasis that was just off of the where the LZ was for the hospitals. And yeah, it was summertime, so you know, it was probably July again, or somewhere close to there, that we were using it as some place to go smoke pot. You know,
Right.
it
Okay.
created like a depression in the ground, and we were, so we could actually sit in a lowered position and see out over the whole LZ. It was a huge area. It was about 300 foot square probably. But yeah, they couldn't bust me for that, but what happened was is it coincided with the guy that was in that position. He derosed. He had completed his year, and so they needed somebody with my MOS to fill the medical records spot. So I got put in. I got put in my MOS finally.
And it sounds like you were there for maybe a few months, and then at some point you were sent to a hospital in Japan, and then eventually to one here in the US.
Right.
Okay. And at what point were you out of the service?
Well, if I the after I finished or I was discharged from the hospital, I ended up getting stationed there TDY for the remainder of my tour. And the Army, they tried very hard to get me my graduate equivalency diploma before my discharge. But yeah, I should have been discharged on April 20th of 1970, but because it was the weekend, my graduation diploma didn't arrive until Monday the 23rd or something like that. So I was in the Army a couple of extra days.
Okay. So how did you feel when you were discharged from the Army?
Well,
And were you still suffering from some of the things that led them to send you to the hospital in Japan and so forth?
oh yeah. Well, my family came down to Pennsylvania and visited me and brought my girlfriend and everything like that. And so there was some normalization. My father was a hospital administrator, so you know it was it, and I had been diagnosed as retarded when I was 7 years old, and my parents had no real expectations of me for the rest of my life. It was kind of pathetic, but it was, you know, what we know today is ADD or one of those types of
Right.
disorders. You know, I but yeah, um seeing my parents and my girlfriend and stuff were important segues, I guess, into returning home. I once I got discharged, I was still very afraid, very paranoid of what I knew or what I didn't know, you know, that might get me killed. I stayed in my room for about 2 weeks, and I was embarrassed at not even having the courage to write the guys that I just spent a year in the field with to let them know what was going on.
Right. What was your relationship like with the other guys that you served with out there?
It was very close. We were a tight knit group. Uh, um, we all had handles. You know, we disguised our personalities by creating a handle, a nickname
Right.
that would protect our identity during radio communications. So yeah, there were a lot of guys that I didn't even really know their name. I mean, I knew the company commander's radio operator because he was our only contact, like when I was out on observation post or rear guard or some isolated position on whatever mountain we were on.
Now, why did you think you needed to protect your identity when you were on the radio?
I don't think we really recognized the need. It was more just it was some sort of a status sign of acceptance, you know, like when the old man wanted me, he'd ask for Tootsie Roll.
Right.
Because all of my requests home were for Tootsie Rolls and for The powder drink you put in water.
Okay. You mean maybe Tang?
Yeah, well, one of those, you know. But yeah, the first sergeant was in line and right behind me, and he said, "You keep eating those Tootsie Rolls. One of these days, you're going to turn into a Tootsie Roll."
So was that your name?
So, well, what happened was one day I happened to
Rick, I'm sorry, just can you, yep,
sit
there you go,
back.
thank you. Yeah, there you go, thank you.
Okay, I was pushing point, and we had to go through a bamboo stand that was about 700 feet of thick bamboo, and the two guys behind me would pull out their machetes and they would whack the bamboo, and then they would hurl me into the bamboo stand to knock them down, and then we'd move on and move on and move on. It took all day to get through this bamboo stand and up the other side of a saddle that we were in. It was in between two mountains, and we got through that, and Charlie opened up fire. He was on the opposite hill, and all the bullets were just going over our head, you know. And the company commander pulled us back and called in an airstrike. And of course, now I had to low crawl backwards through all of those broken pieces of bamboo that I just cut down or been hurled into. And
Yeah,
everybody else was sitting on the opposite hill, and you know, so I was the last one that was back in retreat, and they all started laughing at me, and I couldn't figure out why. You know, it's just like I had just come as close to biting it as I cared to, you know, and I was really hot, and they said, "Look at your face," and somebody showed me a mirror, and the Tootsie Roll that I had in my mouth was covered all over my face.
Oh, wow.
Smeared in Tootsie Roll. So that became my handle.
That
You know,
makes sense.
then I was one of the boys.
Okay, now, you said that you didn't take part in that many firefights, but what do you remember about the firefights in general?
They were never what we expected. They were always
Well, what had you expected?
well, we were told that like there would be a regiment. We were going up a hill against a suspected regiment that was in the area, and we'd get up there and there'd be nobody there. You know, and that happened over and over and over again. It was like we were chasing ghosts.
Okay. But you said that they were never like what you expected. So what were they actually like when they happened?
Well, there were small, well dug in positions. A lot of them were underground, and but you know, say we were expecting a company size operation, there might be 4 or 5 soldiers on top of the mountain that were firing at us.
Okay. And I assume you found the firefights to be somewhat frightening.
Well, actually, they were a great release. I mean, you know, it was more like, yeah, they were frightening, but it at the same time it unleashed that fury and the frustration of living in the jungle.
Okay. Now, you've written about your experiences in battle, right? In the poems in
Yeah.
your book called Caverns of the Soul.
Mhm.
Okay, what did you draw on when you created the poems?
Well,
Ideas did, yeah,
there were a couple of instances that was involved in that were reflections that when I was first admitted into the VA hospitals, a couple of years maybe after I'd been discharged, I was told my expressions of the war were way too violent and I was scaring the staff.
hmm,
And they gave me massive doses of medication and one day sucking my socks and then on the day room in the day room a book cart went by and a book fell off and it was a book of poetry
okay,
and it was like the light bulb went on. I don't even remember what I'd read. It was a book written by Sigmund Freud's lover's mother. And she was very angry at Dr. Freud for seducing her son. And what it showed me was that I didn't have to speak my truths. I only needed to write them. And in order to entertain myself, I made them rhyme. So I kind of unleashed the warrior poet. I as my time in hospitals,
right.
there were many admissions between 1970 and 1980 that usually resulted in a composition of some war experience that I needed to relate.
Was the writing helpful at all in, helping you to deal with your
Yeah.
feelings?
Oh yes, it was very cathartic. I didn't have a lot of words or for the emotions that I was feeling. I grew up rather isolated. I felt cold in the winter and I felt hot in the summer. That was the extent of a feeling emotion for Rick Harrienger.
Okay,
And the my recollections and reflections on my war experience right from those early days when I was when I lost a couple of months in the hospital for the pneumonia was
right.
that was the impetus for the a relationship and a poem called Philadelphia that was about a nurse that followed me to Vietnam. I never got to see her my whole first tour because, of course, I was in the north and she was in a base hospital in the south. But she fell in love with a helicopter pilot, and I happened to have CQ, which is charge of quarters for the day in the rear area, and I got a wedding invitation from her that she was marrying a chopper pilot, and it was kind of a well, it was a very traumatic realization, especially because I looked up from this wedding invitation and Parker was standing there in front of me. He
Like
was, yeah,
the actor,
childhood hero. Yeah,
right?
Danny Boone. Yeah, Davy Crockett.
Yes.
Yeah, and he was a little put off because like I looked up from the wedding invitation to him, and it just like the disconnect was so complete. All I could say was, "Can I help you, sir?"
Now, was he there to visit
He was
the
there to
soldiers
visit
in the
troops.
hospital? Yeah.
No, this was still out in the field.
Oh, out in the field. Okay.
Well, we weren't in the field in the rear area, but
Okay.
in on K or somewhere around that. We always we were a very secretive unit. You know, they would move us out in a heartbeat. You know, there would be some intelligence that would come in or something, and we'd be on the pad in 15 minutes. You know, it just we were in a place called Phu Cat or Phu Mi, Phu Bai. They were all outside of Pleiku or on K. We were nestled in that corridor of the Central Highlands.
Okay. So now, I want to get to my final question here is, how did your service impact you in the rest of your life?
Well, the early years I tried to stay involved with other veterans through the Vietnam Veterans of America. I was in chapter 59, I think it was in Westchester County. And it was at the time when the Vietnam Memorial was just being organized, and you know, a Vietnamese or a Oriental woman's design was the one that was accepted, and it was just months of infighting and arguing and carrying on about this memorial. And of course, once it was done, it was stunning.
Oh. Hmm.
Well, there's a couple of poems about that too in my book.
Okay.
Memorialized in marble, etched the names in stone, the rolls of souls who heard your tolls but never made it home.
Ah.
We who knew the valiant few furrowed in your lawn are quite concerned you haven't learned the fury of the pawn.
Rick, well, I think that's a good way to end the conversation with your poetry. You know, it's obviously a harrowing story, and I appreciate your sharing it with us. We will.
Well, thank you for your persistence.
Yeah, not a problem. And we will be in touch about where you can access this on the internet. And again, we honor you for your service, and we thank you for your service to the country.
Well, thank you. I want to remind you to make sure you take Jim to Cafe Lena on September 15th.
I forget what is going to be on the 15th. Who is appearing?
A woman musician. Her name is Mary. I'm going to pronounce it Guthrie because that's the way I remember it. It's Guthier.
Okay.
So there's an R on the end of it.
Yeah, and I use spelling. Yeah.
She's a very talented war historian musician that I think she was probably Desert Storm or somewheres in that era, you know, and anyway, her music is very powerful, and she's going to be right there in Saratoga.
Okay. Terrific. I will make sure to mention to him, Rick.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.